I got my first credit card when I was 17 years old. Um, and it was a very interesting experience because 17 years old, I had my first credit card. I think my limit was like 2000 or something like
Oh,
that.
it's a lot.
Yeah. And it was obviously when I was a student, right?
Hello and welcome to the podcast, Lalita Swaminathan. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome, Lalita.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here as well.
Thank you so much. So, on this podcast, we talk about personal finance, investing, and career insights. So, I really have the privilege of knowing you. And Lalita is a healthcare IT professional. She has wide experience working with, big uh, institutions in the healthcare system as a team lead. She consults on her own. And she also has a master's in genome science from the University of British Columbia. So she will tell us more about that. So I'm very excited to have you on the podcast, Lalita. Do you care to tell us who Lalita is in brief, your career and your story?
Yeah, of course. So initially I started off in the cancer research. I've been really interested in cancer research since I was in like undergraduate.
Yes.
So that's where I started off, but then slowly my career's trajectory changed over time.
Yes.
So I still work in healthcare. I work in healthcare IT.
Mhm.
So I'm not like a nurse or a doctor or anything like that.
Yes.
But I use technology and like different software systems to make the lives of the healthcare workers better so that they
Mhm.
can provide better patient care.
That's fantastic. So you are that guy who like helps in, software implementation so that I see like where each time that I go to the hospital, they review on the computers, there's the software and it pulls out all the data like for the patient, maybe
Yeah.
from, your family doctor. So it
Mhm.
integrates all that information into on the screen so that they can make decisions faster. Okay,
That's right.
that's interesting. So tell us, Lalita, I know it's very challenging to complete a master's degree at the University of British Columbia. Can you tell us a little bit more about your research for your master's in genomic science?
Yeah. So I was very lucky because I was able to get secure a scholarship in order to do my master's.
Hmm.
So I got a couple of government scholarships, and my supervisor from BC Cancer also helped me secure some like lucrative, like small scale, private scholarships and stuff. And yeah, my actual program was in prostate cancer.
Hmm.
So I mainly studied how you can do like the initial diagnosis of prostate cancer can be made better
Hmm.
using artificial intelligence, specifically like data augmentation tools.
Hmm.
So we'd use the ultrasound images of
Hmm.
patients to scan for like the tumor and then use their full genome. It's called the whole genome. We'd sequence the whole genome and then compare it to like the ultrasound images and then use some artificial intelligence tools to determine if the patient has cancer, what stage of cancer, things like that, rather than using the urine test. Currently, the only test that
Hmm.
is widely used in Canada is called
Hmm.
the PSA test for men.
Hmm.
Um, and that's basically a urine test, and they specifically look for a PSA antigen.
Hmm.
But it's a 60-year-old test. It has a lot of issues with
Yes.
it. And even healthcare providers don't trust the result when you do it the first time. They want you to repeat it multiple times, which prolongs your diagnosis. And then if they do suspect a cancer or if it's a tumor,
Hmm.
they only thing they can do is do a biopsy, which is obviously very invasive. So yeah, like instead of getting through these invasive procedures, which is also really like expensive for our
Hmm.
healthcare system. My research goal was to like do something that's a little bit cheaper, more
Hmm.
technologically focused, but also patient focused and easier for the healthcare system. And apart from that, through that research, I also started studying like patient flow in like the oncology and radiology departments, how patient moves from like say the emergency department
Hmm.
into like the oncology department. How is that initial testing done? How is that initial ultrasound done? Things like that.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, do you care to share like how prevalent is the issue of cancer? Because, sometimes it's something that, people may not be aware, like statistically in Canada, like, do you have like, like an idea of what percentage of people succumb to cancer,
Yeah.
stuff? Yeah.
I don't have the numbers right off my head, but I know prostate cancer is specifically very prevalent for men,
Mm.
but even more prevalent for people of color,
Mm.
specifically Black men. There is something about, I think, like the melanin in your skin that absorbs extra calcium and stuff.
Mhm.
So the Black men are in higher chance of getting prostate cancer as compared to like Caucasian or Asian men. But that's not to say that like those
Yeah.
groups of people won't be affected as well. A lot of it can also be genetic. But
Mm-hmm.
it is a big problem, and it is also something that is preventable, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I would definitely say if you have a history of any type of cancer in your family,
Mm-hmm.
you are a male, then definitely get tested for prostate cancer as soon as you can. I think in Canada you can start testing from 55 is when like when you go to the family doctor and stuff, they will test it for you. They will automatically like tick off the PSA test
Mm-hmm.
option on your urine test. But if you are really concerned, you can also ask for it. Or
Mm-hmm.
you can always go to the hospital and ask to get a PSA test done as well.
Oh, fantastic. So now tell me a little bit more about your experience, as a consultant, as an IT professional. What is your typical day like, Lalita, when you wake up, when you're working? What are sort of things that you actually do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I kind of got into this by accident. Like I said, I thought I was going to be like a researcher kind of thing, but then I quickly found academia to be a little bit difficult
Yes.
to stay in.
Yeah.
Um, as a woman, but also as a young professional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't pay as much. It doesn't, the opportunities are very one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of grants and stuff that you have to keep applying for. So I
Yeah.
kind of started getting into like the healthcare IT side of things quite
Mm-hmm.
by accident. I started working for the service desk in BC. Service
Mm-hmm.
desk is like anybody who's in a healthcare will know what service desk is.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's just like what the line that nurses and doctors call to get
Oh.
on the software that they are working on at the hospital.
Mm.
So I started working in that, and that's actually a unionized position,
Okay.
which a lot of people don't know. You work for like a private company, but then you kind of help in, you're still unionized under the same union as like nurses and clerks and stuff at the hospital. And it is a pretty lucrative field because they need people with like some healthcare background and healthcare knowledge, but also some IT knowledge. So that's how I got into it. And today I do my own consulting. So I'm an independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And my day to day will vary depending on my client.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes if I have to go in person for a client, I am doing like meetings with different chief of surgery, chief of emergency,
Mm.
or like the chief medical officer of the hospital, and kind of having those meetings to like determine their clinical workflow. So we determine what is something that they do today, what are like medications that they order, what are like the lab tests that they order, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we take that information, I would take that information and see how we can translate it into the new system that they have. So it's called the change management process.
Okay.
So, how are they going to adapt to the new change that is inevitably going to happen because they're transitioning into a new system? And surprisingly, in Canada, a lot of our healthcare and hospital systems are still paper-based.
Mm.
And right now, I think health in Canada does have a new law or something where they want to make sure that hospitals are going paperless.
Mm.
So they want to make sure all the patient information is stored in some sort of an EMR system.
What
EMR is
is EMR?
yeah, EMR is electronic medical record. It's the
Okay.
software that hospitals use. And so it needs to be some sort of like an EMR system, and it needs to like adhere to certain standards that Canada has implemented. So they want to make sure that like all the healthcare facilities are transitioning towards that. And across Canada, it's being rolled out across different provinces.
That's fantastic. And now, as a woman in STEM, like, do you find it very interesting, or are there some challenges that you face working in that space? Because it seems like it's a very interesting space.
Yeah. I would say when I was in academia, I really did feel like, oh, I'm a woman in STEM. Being in healthcare IT now, it's less so because I work with like people from like diverse backgrounds, different gender and sexually orientation people. However, when I was working in academia, I definitely did feel that there are comments being made. There are certainly like um, preconceived notions when you walk into a room
Mm,
and start talking about different things. Before you even start, people have an idea of who you are and
mm,
what information that you know and what you bring to the table, right?
mm,
Working in academia when I was doing my master's, we had small classes and there would be like group projects and stuff. And you can definitely feel that like, oh, like you're probably the only woman at the table, or
mm,
the only person of color at the table, even,
mm,
you know?
mm,
So yeah, that I found that was more prevalent and prominent to me
mm.
in academia and less so in my career today, which is also why I feel like I'm more comfortable in this career as well.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, like realistically, you're not going to be in any healthcare system and not
Mhm.
find a person of color. Like
Uh,
healthcare systems are filled with like people from Nigeria, people from Philippines, people from India. Uh,
yes.
we're coming from diverse backgrounds, and you
Yes.
cannot overlook that. Uh,
Yes.
but in academia, it's less so, which is
Yes.
really like sad. But yeah,
It's the reality.
yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. Only 31% of the people who tune in to watch this podcast, they are subscribed. So I want to encourage you to please subscribe so that this content can reach far and wide. Thank you again, and may the markets be with you. Now, since you do your own consultants, I'm curious though, like, about the personal finance aspect. Like, how do you manage, you're running your own business, right? Like, do you like how do you go about it, like when you are you're getting paid, you pay for the expenses, and also do you keep like a buffer, like emergency fund, and invest some money in the market, or
Yeah.
what, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, of course. It was definitely a big learning curve to go from
Yeah.
an employee to a contractor.
Yes.
But yeah, like I think one of the first things I had to quickly figure out was taxes and how to make sure that I am paying myself enough where individually I
Mhm.
seem competent tomorrow when I'm like taking out any sort of personal loans, right? Like a mortgage or anything like that. You need
Yes.
to have a certain level of income in order to qualify for those things.
Hmm.
So I had to quickly figure out what that number will look like. And then if that number will make sense for me to be able to pay off like all of my bills and also have enough money to save and invest and stuff. Um, I got into investing mainly during like the COVID time,
Hmm.
and has really like peaked since then.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I still make sure that we're putting aside some money
Hmm.
on investing and saving. Um,
Hmm.
and then the rest of it obviously goes to like different expenses and stuff.
Yes.
The monthly amount does vary, but I do try to put aside at least like $1,000 that goes towards investing and saving. So about 2,000 for it
Mm.
all together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the rest of it goes towards like whatever bills I might have to pay and all of
Hmm.
But yeah, like that's pretty much how I
Mhm.
manage it. Typically, I try to keep it at like 20-25% that
Mm.
aside for saving and investing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And this is not, investment advice. It's just us having this conversation just to be clear. So, like, have you lost money investing in the stock market?
Yes.
What did you learn from that?
I
Do you
mean,
mind
you
saying?
technically don't lose money unless you pull the money out.
Yes, if you sell, right? At the
Yeah.
bottom.
Yeah. And I still haven't pulled it out, so I technically haven't lost it
You're
yet.
holding on.
Yeah. But yeah, there were just some like 3D stocks
Yes,
that I had me and my spouse had
yes,
thought would be like a good idea to put aside money in.
yes, yeah,
They're not doing so well, and I don't
yeah,
think they're gonna do that well,
yeah,
depending on based on like the average that we invested it in.
yeah,
But also like, just trying out different things, like for
yeah,
example, options trading
yeah,
stuff. And when you're trying those different things, you lose a small amount of money here and there.
yes,
Painful, but also
yes,
remember that it is only a small amount in the grand scheme of things.
yes.
So yeah, it happens. But again, yeah, like I said,
Mm.
even with all those losses, I
Yeah,
still made more money investing
yeah,
than
yeah. You're basically paying some tuition, fees for that, and you learn, right? And the good thing I take away from that, Lalita, is that you keep your risk. You don't go all in because
Mhm.
if you lose, then it means you just go back to zero and you start. So maybe if it's just 5-10% of your overall portfolio that is in one stock, and then if it doesn't do well, it may not affect the overall portfolio by a very big, uh, proportion. So that's very interesting. Have you made some mistakes, with credit cards? Because I know when I came to Canada, I didn't have access to credit cards when I was in Zimbabwe. I was like, oh, this is free money in courts. And I was kind of like, at some point, like careful, but
Yeah,
at some point it caught up with me. But I've since learned my
yeah,
lesson that I have to pay right after, using my credit card. If I don't have money, I don't do that. Do you care to share that?
yeah.
You don't have to share specifics if you're not comfortable.
Yeah. I got my first credit card when I was 17 years old. Um, and it was a very interesting experience because 17 years old, I had my first credit card. I think my limit was like 2000 or something like
Oh,
that.
it's a lot.
Yeah. And it was obviously when I was a student, right? And
Yes.
then it's also my first time living away from home. So
Mm,
both of those combinations together were very interesting. I feel like the first few months, I paid it off right away. Like
mhm.
everything was like always paid off on time, in full. Um,
Yes.
because I was like, oh, if I even spend $20, I need to pay it off right away.
Yes.
And over time, your expenses start building, and
Yes.
you quickly realize that, like, oh, it's been 6 months and I've only been making minimum payments, you know?
Yes.
And it's only $2,000. Like today, I'm
Yeah.
like, why didn't I just pay it off? Um,
Yeah.
but back then, I was like, I think that's also the time I started getting into like buying makeup. So I would like all the
Just
money in
swipe.
Sephora. Yeah, just swipe. And then you have all these like things that you want go out with your friends or roommates and do.
Put
And
it
you see
on the
other
credit card.
people, yeah, and you see other people purchasing things. So you get that like what is it called? Fear of missing out because
Yes.
they're having these experiences, you are not.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, I definitely succumbed to that for a bit. But
Yeah.
I learned and I was able to like pay it off
Yeah.
quickly. I think
Yeah.
that's also my mindset around like
Yeah.
finances was always like I have to be independent. I can't
Yes.
afford not to be independent with my finances. So I
Yeah.
quickly realized it. It
Yeah.
took about a year, but yeah, I
Yeah.
was able to pay it off in full after.
Yeah, I remember like you could pay like up to 20% in interest rate, and they, Visa companies, like the credit card companies, they can write like if you are paying minimum payments, it will take you 15, 20 years to pay this off. So it's in fine print, right? So maybe you have 2000 if you pay, it's like really interesting. So I'm
Yeah,
glad you learned the lessons quite early.
yeah.
Now, as we go to the last segment of this conversation, what are the key lessons that you have learned over your career? Like, like are there some things that you would say have enabled you to propel you to success?
Yeah. I mean, I touched on this briefly before, but
Mhm.
I think for me, financial independence, especially as a
Yeah.
brown woman, is super, super important
Yeah.
because I think like as a community, one, we don't talk really about money. We
Yeah.
don't grow up talking about money. Um, and then two, we don't talk about money in terms of how it empowers women.
Mhm.
So today I have curated my career path the way that I have, and I'm happy with it because
Mhm.
not only does it pay money, but the biggest luxury in life is time,
Time,
right? Um,
freedom.
yeah, freedom of time is the biggest luxury, and money just allows you to do that. It's a tool to help you do that. Um, and that's why, like, I have chosen this career path, and I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm glad for all the circumstances that led me to it. So that's some of the things that I've learned, like, whatever you think when you're like even 20 years old, 25 years old, it doesn't matter. Whatever
Yeah.
you think is going to be a career path, and if you don't achieve it, or it's not a competition, it's not a race. Um,
Yes.
it's just about what works for you, what makes you happy, and what gives you the independence that you deserve. Whatever that looks like for some people, right? For some people, that means becoming a doctor. But for
Hmm.
some people, that means just having the luxury of time, being able to walk your dog in the middle of the day, go to the beach, whatever
Yeah.
you want to do,
Yeah.
right? So, like, just know what your goals are in life, and your
Yes.
career is only there to align those goals for you. It's only a tool to align those goals. Your career is not your life. Your work is not your life. It's all about balance. It's all about making sure that you have the time to do things that you love, like whether you like to do some art or spend time with your friends and family members. Um, and like I said, like just time for yourself.
Yes.
I think in general, like productivity and like the hustle culture is very overrated. Um,
Yes.
Making sure that you are curating your time and energy in doing something that makes you happy.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I was going to ask you, like, I know sometimes people, mostly from Zimbabwe, reach out and say, "Oh, the jobs in healthcare, they are not that great." Can you speak to that? Like, because you work in that particular field, and it's quite lucrative. Because I know people can get a pension plan. They also
Mhm.
get, vacation benefits and all this. And in Canada, what I've seen is because of most of the aging population, there are quite a lot of opportunities in that sector.
Yeah.
And, I actually find it interesting because we all gonna get old at
Mhm.
some point if we are lucky to live that far, right?
Mhm.
You wanna speak to that?
Yeah. I don't know. I think people who are of the international community, I will say it will be difficult for them to come here and do the same job that they were doing before, right? I think it's
Yes,
just thinking outside of the box.
yes,
So if they're a doctor in, say, Zimbabwe,
yes,
and they're coming here, it's very unlikely that they're going to become a doctor here as soon as they come here, right?
yes.
But there are roles in healthcare IT where you can use like artificial intelligence tools. You can use your people skills and clinical knowledge in general to work in like clinical backgrounds, in like clinical analyst kind of roles. And a lot of them prefer clinical experiences, even if it's foreign experience.
Mm.
Um, and that is something that like the international community, I think, just needs to like think outside their box and be like, okay, what is an adjacent healthcare role that I can do with my experience so that you can come here and, work, and they easily pay 90K, 100K plus,
Yeah.
because if you think about it, doctors here are not going to work in healthcare IT and work
Yes.
a 90K, 100K job because
Mm.
to them, that is not as much money. right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
they just spent like 10 years working and putting themselves through school here. But
Yes.
if you're coming from Zimbabwe or something, or
Yeah.
India or whatever other country, and you
Yes.
cannot become a doctor here, but you can work a 90K, 100K job,
Yeah.
that is amazing, right?
Yeah.
That's quite a lot of money. And there's also rural areas across Canada that are constantly hiring for people, and they give you a lot of tax benefits and more incentives to stay there. They give you money to stay there and everything.
Yeah.
Um, because they're rural areas, they are great for families because schools and the community aspect is great.
Yes.
Everybody in the town knows everybody. The whole
Yeah.
town is like 40-minute walk. Uh,
Yes.
and it's great. So yeah, I think it's just all about thinking outside the box.
And I was just thinking as you were speaking, Lalita, that even if you still wanna pursue the medical doctor field, there are pathways for you to pursue that. I think in Canada there are 10 provinces and territories. So each province is different. So if you still want to become a doctor or a nurse, you have to write exams. You pay money, for the exams. And maybe it will take you a year or two to prepare for that because they just want to make sure that they standardize the knowledge of the Canadian experience. But it's gonna take longer. You pay money, but like you said, you can still get other roles without necessarily following that path, like clinical analyst,
Yeah.
which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wanna share before we wrap up?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to add to that as well. I just wanted
Mhm.
to say that like in again coming back to rural communities, there
Yes.
are actually pathways that rural communities can they offer like schools and stuff
Mm.
where doctors can start going to school in the doctor program like in medical school
Yeah.
without having to do those exams, even for
Mm.
students. Of course, it's quite a lot of money that you pay,
Yeah.
but you just have to show commitment that you're going to stay in that rural area for at least
Okay.
3 years. So that's a pathway that's available.
Hmm.
How you prove that you're going to stay there, that's up to you, right? But
Yes.
yeah, like there's a lot of options available for folks who are coming internationally.
That's fantastic. It's been a pleasure, talking to you, Lalita. I learned quite a lot from your experience, and I know you personally, you're a great person. So I do want to thank you for the privilege of your time. And for the viewers, thank you so much. If you wanna reach out to Lalita. I'm gonna connect her LinkedIn profile on the comments, and hopefully you can also, learn and reach out to her if you have like specific questions. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Have a wonderful day, and may the markets be with you. Thank you again.
Thank you.